Ladies and gentlemen, this is Tosh Talks, and I am Tosh Berman. Today, I want to talk about a journal, a book actually, but it's actually a compilation of a magazine called Source, Music of the Avant Garde. This publication ran from 1966 to 1973. Only 11 issues were made, produced. A 12th issue was made, but never came out due to financial problems. And Source was started and edited by two gentlemen by the name of Larry Austin and Douglas Kahn. And Austin and Kahn are from the University, they're from Davis, California, and they were teaching music and art at that university. And then I think they eventually, or one of them went to Berkeley. And at the time in the 60s, Berkeley and Davis was a hotbed of music activity. When I'm speaking of music, I'm not just talking about rock and roll, but I'm talking specifically compositional music or experimental music, electronic music, or 20th century composers. Many came by there to study, to do music, to participate in concerts there, and it was sort of one of the places in the United States besides New York, where there's lots of activity, where people are studying the new music that was being produced. So Source, the Music of the Avant Garde, 1966 to 1973, and here's the book. And I found this book total by accident. I went to a record store called Mount Analog in Highland Park. And I'd never been there before, but I went there because I've understood that they carry a lot of experimental albums or new music on vinyl there. New music, I mean anything that's not pop music, this stuff that's more instrumental, experimental, and basically 20th century, mid-century music. And the Source is fascinating. What a fascinating journal, because it's a journal made by composers, written for composers to contribute to this journal. I don't recall one source or aspect where a critic is writing or a writer is writing about music. It's all critics, it's all composers writing about either their music or other people's music. And so in a sense, this magazine, The Source, represents a community of the time. A community where artists, because they're so marginalized just by the type of music they're playing, they had to have a publication of some sort. And again, this is before the internet, before having a web page, website, all that type of stuff. You used to make zines or journals. And Source was a high quality printed journal because a lot of the composers were very visual minded, and the Source published a lot of original music scores. And these music scores on its own are like artwork, like visual art pieces. So that visual aspect, as well as the music that's made from that score, is very important, and it's equally important, the visuals as well as hearing. And people like John Cage is noted for his score making and what he puts on a page. He's a writer as well as a poet, and it's very important to him how the music is conveyed visually on a page as well as what you hear or how it's performed. And the only performer, actually, speaking of performers, are in the Source, basically is David Tudor, who David Tudor worked with John Cage for many, many years. And some of the composers that are who contribute to this book are Robert Ashley, Earl Brown, Harry Parch, Robert Ashley, Toshi Ichiyanaji, Morton Fieldman, of course, John Cage, Pauline Oliveros, and Dick Higgins from the Fluxus movement, as well as Christian Wolff. And and Alvin Lucier, Ken Friedman, and then people like some other, and then Nam June Paik, another Fluxus-related artist, visual artist, and a composer of sorts. And the source, reading the source is fascinating because you're really getting like a window view of what this culture is like at that time. It's a fascinating world. And I'll just give you an example of some of the scores one can see here. See, we can take a guess what this is. Basically, it's one line going down the page and it's all blank. This is 4 minutes and 33 seconds by John Cage. So this is the score. It goes for a couple of pages. This is not for you to draw in like a coloring book. This is the actual John Cage score. Though if you wish to draw in it, you're more than welcome. So just to let you know, this whole book is not that way. We're just talking about 4 or 5 pages, which represents 4 minutes and 33 seconds of John Cage's piece where a musician sits down, for instance, by the piano and doesn't play anything, doesn't do any music, just stays quiet for 4 minutes and 33 seconds. That's the score for that, which I find totally fascinating. The other good score is this one I find interesting. Now, as a musician, how do you follow the score? Well, each dot here, you see the big black dots? Each dot represents a particular type of sound, and you follow that sound to another dot. So I presume it's like sound traveling. It's like it's about traveling. It's sort of like a noise that goes from one dot to another. This piece is actually put together by a composer by the name of John Mizelle. So anyway, this book is full of music scores of that sort. And what I find really interesting about music in the 20th century is the playfulness, yet it's being extremely serious at the same time. They're very serious about their work, but there's a sense of play and fun as well. So a lot of it is very conceptual. They're very conceptually minded, a lot of these composers. And due to their conceptual minded, they do go into other mediums of the art, such as literature, poetry, the visual arts, of course, with their scores. And the Source magazine came out twice a year, and the original edition is it's about this width. It's like pretty much a good idea what the width and size of the original Source magazine. Not as thick, of course, but they had like a spiral binding, and they made it that size because of the design of the scores. They want that whole score on that page as much as possible. And again, this touches a different. It's a small community of composers who had a need to communicate with each other, and it's not announcing concerts or shows they're doing or just saying, hey, come see me. It's mostly sharing of ideas and sharing concepts. And one thing great about all these composers and musicians at that time, including the musicians, artists, composers from the Fluxus movement, is the need to share, the need to communicate. It's all about communication. And they're not interested in communicating to the masses. They're more interested in communicating within themselves and the listeners. And you don't have to be, as the listener, you don't have to be part of a big group. It can be a very small group. A lot of this music was originally performed in very small theaters or just in people's lofts or apartments. In the essence, they're very much like chamber music. And it's interesting when you look at the diagrams where they place instruments or synthesizers, not synthesizers, but electronic equipment. It's very important how it looks on the stage as well as where the audience is. Sometimes the audience is in the center, sometimes they're on the side. Sometimes there are speakers behind the audience, some in the front, of course, and the side. So where the audience is placed, is just as important as where the music is placed or where the instruments are placed. So it's not necessarily just a stage and audience type of situation. It's sometimes the audience is very much part of the music or part of the performance, just by how they are placed in that room with that composer's work. And Source spends many pages talking about that concept, as well as the question of distributing music and how to get that music across. And again, it's not to the masses, it's to the people who are interested. It's the essence that what's more important, reaching 1 million people or reaching 50 people who really care about what you're doing? I personally prefer reaching 50 people more than 1 million, because 1 million is too big, they're not focused. 50 people will be very focused on what you're doing. And it's a direct sense of communication. And I want to read you something here as an example of the spirit of these composers this time. This is an Italian composer. His name is Giuseppe Chiari, Chiari. And this is a piece called Quelle che volte. It's a piece for several instruments, but the text is the main part of this piece. So bear with me. Play what you like as amateur. Play in the traditional manner. Each performer plays several instruments. Only melodious instruments. All the instruments are different. Play monodically even on instruments with a keyboard. When one begins to play, all the others begin too. When one stops playing, all the others stop after him. You may play an instrument you do not know, but you must try to play it in the traditional manner. Everyone can play what he likes without bothering about what the others are playing. There always comes a moment in the life of a musician when he owns an instrument for the first time. When this happens, our hands touch the keyboard or the strings timidly, cautiously, with a look on our face which we will not be able to have a few days later. When we have already learned a few days of playing, our hands are humble. We may try a classical tune or a popular one. We may touch the keys at random. We will always move with extreme sympathy. We must play a tune or part of a tune we like, the tune we love at that particular moment, possibly for reasons which are quite unmusical and very much personal. We may improvise, research, compose. We may leave our own instrument and ask for another's. We cannot refuse to give up an instrument. We must not intentionally answer and develop musical ideas belonging to someone else. Each individual is enshrined in himself. His dialogue with his instrument is private and confidential. The piece you play must be sad, but this sadness is firm and does not despair. It is the sadness of perceiving that knowledge is now knowledge, that learning is forgetting something which we will never conquer again. Play as if playing was a gift which may last half an hour and then stop. As if we had steadily entered a shop that sells musical instruments, you play at random, hastily, before running away. We must play not for others, but for ourselves. A single note may be enough. Play as if you wish to know a sound, which has been in your mind for a long time. Now, when it is going to be realized, it will arouse our emotion, not inferior to what you thought. In the course of this activity, the musician may stop. He may stop before the instrument on which he is playing, without moving. He will visit no one else. Little by little, everyone will notice this. No one, though, must help others to notice it. Every man must respect the work done by others. If someone goes on playing on an instrument, engrossed in it, refrain from obtruding. Make no movement which may imply that he has been left alone. Not until the musician comes out of this intervention, raises his head, and comes back to the thought of his fellow beings, will he notice that everyone has stopped playing and drop his hands. No one must play music requiring great technical skill in order to show that he is a virtuoso. No one must play as if it were a joke. as if he were doing it for fun. This indulging in a moment of madness with the intention of reverting to wisdom. There is no irony towards oneself or toward the public. We must never overdo. This is a piece by Giuseppe Chiari, Quel J'ai Volte, and actually I just performed a music piece in front of you. Because then afterwards, the only instructions after reading the text is this for several instruments. What instruments, we don't know. It's up to the musicians, up to people who show up to perform this piece. I choose not to pick up an instrument. I chose to read the text to you instead. So in a way, I contribute to this music piece. And in that spirit, Source magazine, or Source, the musical Avant Garde journal, expresses many thoughts in that line, in that order. It's very conceptual. It's very much about freedom. And it's very much how one thinks of being an artist or how to do art in their environment or in their world. And again, Source, Music of the Avant Garde, published by the University of California Press. Excellent book, one of the best books I've read about music overall. And edited by Larry Alston and Douglas Kahn. And if you like what I do, please do subscribe to my YouTube channel. It keeps me going. And I will talk to you very shortly later. Bye-bye.